Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode we have another special guest with us. It's Jon Galloway, who of amazing fame, having written many books on Asp.Net, including the one that I always remember from a bit of photoshopping, known as the Giant Forehead book.
That's right.
But Jon has been involved in .NET for many years and has done many exciting things. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Happy to be here. And congratulations. This is your 200th show?
It will be episode 200, and we actually, because of how great the conversation has been with people in the .NET community, we're actually going to be able to squeak like 6 episodes out of it.
Wow.
So it's like 200 A through.
They're wonderful. Yeah. You'll need GUIDs for them.
We will. No, it is really awesome to have you here and to be joining us to talk about some of this stuff. And we, we've been obviously our paths have crossed a number of times over the last decade plus, and so it's good to catch up every now and then in person. Obviously, with social distancing in place and whatnot, we were going to invite you up to Canada so we could mash in person.
Next time,
episode 400, we'll get you out for episode 400. So yeah, for us on the call, we absolutely know who you are. Your journey has moved and wandered over the years. For those who are maybe less familiar with this environment, or they're just stepping into this ecosystem, just can you give us a little bit about your background and why you defected and went to Mac?
Well, I'm actually recording this on a Windows computer, so I like to think of myself as ambidextrous. But yeah, let me catch you up. So I started doing web dev, and just started with development in general in the late 90s, and then I was just kind of feeling like I knew enough about computers to be dangerous. .NET started coming around, so I learned all the way through with web forms and then with MVC as it came out, and worked at a lot of different companies. Worked big financial companies and internet service companies and startups, and around when MVC came out, I was working for Vertigo Software, and Vertigo did for a while like cutting edge. They were the ones making all the demos and the websites for Microsoft conferences, and we worked on March Madness back when Silverlight was a thing. We did Silverlight video streaming for that. And then end of 2009, I joined Microsoft. So at Microsoft, I've been in several different groups, but all of them have been related to .NET community education kind of stuff, and usually focused mostly on ASP.NET. But I've done a lot of kind of different things over that time. So
I think the last time we talked with you, you had just set up a good set of code labs, which was part of the just kind of breaking everybody into the .NET Core community and kind of giving coverage there for all things new in the space.
Yeah, I've worked on that. That was something that I worked with these web camps early on, and helped write some of the content for that. And the idea with these web camps was we would travel and speak in person and lead these workshops. So and putting together kind of workshop content is something that it was just something I started doing because it needed to get done, and people have really liked it. And it's kind of it's a different kind of format. You've got your bigger books, you've got your videos, and you've got your short tutorials. And the idea with a workshop is really something that an instructor can walk a classroom of people through in a day or two, and hopefully they can learn by doing. And then it's one of those things where the first time you present it, you think you're all ready, and then the class gets all lost, and you realize that so you definitely it's a work in progress where you keep improving it. So yeah, and it's been fun to see other people have picked up and work with the same format. So as an example, there's the Blazing Pizza tutorial, which has kind of come from that as well. So yeah. So then most lately, to finish, I took a small detour a little bit for 2.5 years where I worked with the .NET Foundation, and that was very focused on .NET community and open source. It was kind of less technical and a lot more like just organizational stuff. So during that time, we did a lot of things to expand our board and have a community elected board of directors. And we expanded our community sponsors. And we also set things up so that people could join as a voting member of the .NET Foundation. So really kind of moved it from being this tiny little nonprofit that nobody really knew what it was to being something where people can kind of take over. Like the idea was basically give it to the community and the community can direct it. And then starting just over a year ago, I moved to the .NET community team, and one of my main focuses is on .NET on Mac. And so that's working with the Visual Studio for Mac team, helping make sure that the product is as good as it can be for .NET devs, and testing things and doing some content tutorials and things. And then also working with community to find out like what kind of things people are running into or how people are doing .NET Dev on a Mac. So that's been fun.
Yeah, that community aspect has been something that you've been really involved in for quite some time. As you said, pretty much like the length of your career, whatever. But I guess, like I think back to how some of the format for community has changed. And we did a couple of things on, what was it called on Microsoft Virtual Academy. We did some MVA stuff back in the Bootstrap, MVC early days and stuff like that. But then you also went on and really led and forged through getting the .NET Community stand-up going on a weekly basis. And so I know Dave, Simon, and I, we were, when it was like 3 viewers in the very first few, that was us.
We've got at least 5 now.
Thanks.
I was actually on one of those initially.
Oh, cool! Yeah,
accidentally, because somebody had shared the wrong link on Twitter.
That's right. Well, yeah, that's been funny. So that started with back when .NET Core was still being kind of dreamed up, and back then it was like Project K, and it was still like this skunkworks sort of thing. But the team really wanted to develop it in the open and, to just kind of whiteboard things and talk through things. So very informal. And we really would have like ones where it'd be like, Damien would run in the hallway and say, hey, David, want to, talk about this with it? It was really low key. And we did them on Google Hangouts, and they were on Scott's Google Hangouts and then his YouTube channel. And so it was something where it was like, oh, we're starting late today because Scott's got to pick up his kids or whatever, it was just, but yeah, but it's been, like over the time there've been more people watching them. And then we kind of settled into some things that, seem to work. Like we do community links at the beginning. And that really encourages people. Like it shares great information, and it also encourages people that are creating good content, because then they can, hey, I just got a bunch more viewers. And so, we did that for a while, and then started working with James Montemagno, and he said, you've got this show going on every Tuesday, and he said, what if we do a Thursday show that rotates through the other .NET stuff you can build? Because that's part of what's cool about .NET is you can use it to build, web apps for your day job and then go home and build a game with Unity at night, or, build some cool IoT thing, or build desktop apps or whatever, right? So,
or like a mobile app for your Nokia.
There you go. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess you probably could still put it on your Nokia if you've got one. So we started doing that, and we actually, during that time, that was pre-COVID days. So we set up a cool studio. We got the Channel 9 team, and they loved the idea. They helped us set up a studio where we had OBS and cameras, webcams set up, and you could walk in and just hit buttons on Stream Deck, and it would start your show. So we did that, got it all dialed in. We had Tuesday and Thursday shows, and then COVID hit. And then James and I were like, okay, back to the drawing board. So we tried for a while to train all the different speakers because a lot of these people were, they're more used to working on a laptop, and they're not like OBS nerds like James and I were. And like video streaming is hard, and it takes, bandwidth and, all this stuff. So we tried some different things, and I tried setting up like an Azure VM that was running OBS, and it actually worked kind of surprisingly well, but we still ran into issues with logins, and the machine VM would, they'd go to start their stand up, and then it would have updates to install, or dumb stuff. So then we ended up trying some different cloud hosted systems, and we ended up with StreamYard, and that's the one we've been using the most lately. It's pretty nice because it's like you go to a website, you give you set up a show, you give the link to your speakers, and they just kind of do it. So, and then like the latest kind of big thing we did with that was we used that for .NET Conf, which was, earlier in November, and that was several days, and that worked great with that. And we've also kind of spun it out a bit because we were like, hey, we're doing all this work to do our own shows, but we know that everyone else is on lockdown too, and there's meetups that are trying to figure the same thing out. So we kind of set up some systems, and we set up a thing for .NET Foundation where they've got their own StreamYard instance, and James and I dialed it in and wrote some guides, and then we also did some automation. So a meetup can go fill out a form, and it'll put it in a planner, and it'll notify people, and then so it's all kind of, it actually, like the .NET Foundation, there's a team of people that helps run it. Dave Norderer has kind of taken that over mostly. And so it just kind of like new things come in and they just go. So we've had like over the past couple of weekends, we've had events throughout Latin America, Tokyo, like just all over. And people are just running these virtual conferences and meetups and live streaming them. And it's all just kind of, so it's been neat to see that go from a meetup or Google Hangouts,
right?
And,
like a random kind of quagmire of whoever was in the hallway closest kind of thing.
Exactly. And then go to like, okay, we figured out how to run one show, and then we figured out how to run multiple shows, and how to like let everyone do their own thing. So it's been neat to see, and that's, I think, part of what makes me, why I keep getting pulled into .NET community stuff, because I like coding, and I'm kind of happy just sitting here plunking around on my computer, but I'm only able to write so many lines of code, and I'm only able to do so much on my own. But if you can like share and enable other people to do stuff, then it's like, you have worldwide impact, and you get people saying like, hey, we just did this thing, it's great, thanks. It's like, yes.
There's definitely like you mentioned, like that kind of the prequel to the main show was like that community thing where you're sharing links and everything. And I think that was really important for the community. And there was definitely a feedback loop because, as you said, like it kind of encouraged content, but you also saw people like iterating on stuff that was going through there. So I remember seeing like, oh, and here's an update from whomever on this security aspect or whatever, and so they're getting like 2 or 3 mentions or whatever. And I think that those kinds of things really moved people along. Were there any surprises for you along the way in terms of what you saw come out of that community stand up?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there been more than a few cases where we've, people would sort of, because of that, write series. They'd write a blog series. James, I know you wrote some, like your bootstrapping one. That actually early on, it was fun to feature some of those. And then like some of that actually grew out of, I used to pick the links that would feature on the Asp.Net homepage, right? And so then this was kind of like, hey, that worked there, let's use it on this live show. But so then there have been several people, that like got inspired, and then like, next thing you know, they're like MVPs and book deals, and some neat things out of that. So there's several people that have done that. There's also been some, and one great example is Shahid Chowdhury has done several series where he would do like A through Z of ASP.NET Core, and he would write every single week. He would write a new blog post, and each one is like a huge thing. So that's been cool. One other thing that I really like from that is that it starts these conversations that actually end up like changing the product. So there have been some around things like use of HTTP client, and the HTTP client, whether you should reuse or you should keep a reference to it. And then people start arguing, well, that's not good because of this. And then people would say, yeah, but it's a terrible API. And then pretty soon the product team would say like, yeah, it is kind of a terrible API. And then we end up with a better HTTP client. So there've been a few cases like that where it's actually ended up evolving the product. And one kind of neat thing with that is Damian Edwards wrote the original web page we used for the .NET Community Stand-Up. It was just the Asp.Net Community Stand-Up then. And as he wrote the site, he would do some of it like on live video streams himself. And he would use it to test things out. And he'd say like, this is hard. Like this is a pain in the neck. MVC is not a good fit here. Writing these tag helpers are not great. And so he wrote a tag helper pack, and that actually helped. That was some of what helped form the idea of what became Razor Pages. So, it's kind of neat seeing like the whole thing all like kind of working together and being part of that conversation too. So, yeah. And just to kind of like take it further, then just recently, James and team evolved the .NET Community Stand-Up page to being a .NET Live TV page. So it also includes things like Jeff Fritz live streaming, Mads Christensen, Visual Studio Office Hours, and a bunch of other, shows there. So it's kind of like a live TV show thing. So, yeah.
So you're PMing now on the VS for Mac team?
Well, so I'm not directly on the VS Mac team. I actually was for like a short time, but like Microsoft has reorgs every 15 minutes. And so I'm on the .NET community team, but I'm kind of on loan, or I work very much with the VS for Mac team. And so some of the main things I focus on there is kind of like content, docs, blog posts, and social. So a lot of it is kind of like interacting with how we're, interacting with community on stuff. So like just today I was like running around getting a blog post out. This one we're announcing a programming challenge where you can win a copy of a book. And so I had to work with legal and, get all the contest rules set up. So, a lot of that kind of like do a lot of work, get the blog post out, and then yay, and then on to the next one. So, but yeah. And VS Mac it's been a cool time to be working with that. They've added some cool things on during this past year. They added on an integrated terminal. They've done more work with Blazor integration. So like Blazor server and Blazor WebAssembly debugging just shipped. And then lately I've done some presentations on Project Tie. And of course, having that integrated terminal is pretty handy there. That's been another thing I've been interested in lately.
So 10 years ago,
yeah.
Did you see at all any future in which you'd be contributing to the open source community wing of Microsoft and being on loan to the Mac Visual Studio?
No. I mean, it's really hard to predict, I couldn't have predicted last year what this year would be like. So, it's, but you
should have seen this year coming though. Bill Gates.
Yeah, I really should have.
Years ago.
He did. You watched that video and you're like, So, it's interesting too, thinking back 2010, MVC was open source, but that was about it. And it was a real struggle to get anything done open source. And there were times like it actually went downhill for a while before it went uphill again. Like it got harder and harder to do anything open source, and everything was very kind of like, the Windows 8, Windows Phone days were very kind of Microsoft product. Like, if you weren't selling apps, you weren't very important. And, so yeah, would have been really hard to predict how open things got, how easy it is now. I'll talk to lawyers and they'll say like, why aren't you open sourcing this? Or, it's just like, it's everything is just assumed to be open. And it's so much, it's in a way, it's almost like that used to be part of what I did, was like push on things and say like, hey, we need to open source this and we need to do this. And now everyone's like, yeah, of course. So what else are you doing? So definitely that the web changes all the time, and it's interesting to see how things move there. And then, .NET on a Mac is a little bit of a surprise, but not totally. Like I used to be, back in high school, I was the Mac nerd. We had a few Macs there, and I was playing on the Macs. And I've always liked the kind of, using different platforms. And I, way back in the day, I helped with a mono. What was it? It was a live CD. So you would like pop it into a computer, and reboot it with the CD, and you would be running Unix. It was Linux, and we had it pre-built with all the mono stuff. And so, definitely like the whole kind of cross-platform .NET thing was something that I always wished would take off and be more of a thing. And so now, like doing, .NET Dev on a Mac, and it's official. And then I'm like doing, Docker deploys and all this stuff. And it's like, it not only kind of hackily works, it actually totally works. And if it doesn't, I log a bug, so yeah, it's
one of the cool things there too is that, I mean, there was a time when you feared having to work on a project that was from a different version of Visual Studio. And now it's like I would say probably 2017 forward, you don't have to care what platform, you don't have to care what version. It's just projects work. Doesn't matter the environment and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's really been kind of the thing where some constraints, like before, there was no reason for the Visual Studio team to work any differently. And then once it's like, oh, we have to support other platforms, and we have to support, we have to compete with people that are, installing a new JavaScript framework every 20 minutes. And, it's like, once those things were painful, but now it's better for them. It's better for everybody. Like they're able to ship products and bug fixes and things faster. And I think it's taken some time for people to not fear a Visual Studio update, but I don't, it's like every time it's like, oh, an update, great, So yeah, and that whole kind of way of doing software dev is all across Microsoft, and I think kind of across the industry now, where people just expect rapid updates, and because you're expected to update your software all the time, it better be painless. If it's not, you're going to feel that pain every day instead of once a year or twice. So yeah.
It's a far cry from when I started out, and it was like, well, we're going to release next month, we better get started on it right now.
Yeah.
That's how long the build pipeline was.
Exactly. I was thinking through some of this because I was looking at a talk. I did a talk in India earlier this week, in India, virtual talk, and it was about Project Pi, and I was talking about microservices and the kind of speed of deployment, and thinking through earlier at a financial company where we would plan for, months out that we were going to do the big merge and we were going to do the big deployment. And they would tell us like, okay, the deployment starts at 3 p.m. on Friday, and just plan, you may be here all weekend, and I was like, oh, come on. And nope, we were there all weekend. And, it was just the people were staying overnight, or you could go home at midnight and come back early in the morning. But it was just, everything was broken. And it was just like, it's like, why did we do that? Now it's just so great to have this kind of everything updates, and we're just used to it. So,
go ahead,
even
Dave.
just from getting your developer machine set up, it used to take days and days to get all of the things installed that you needed to work on a project.
Yeah.
And that's now, in the last few months, there's several projects I've worked on where we have a mixture of developers running on running Windows, some running Mac, all doing .NET code, and it just works.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. And then it's kind of like, you almost forget and take for granted how much nicer it is,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember interviewing at a company years ago where their big selling feature was like everybody runs exactly the same configuration on their desktop, so you can go and sit down at anybody's desktop and do the same thing. And I was like, wow, that's really oppressive. I don't think I want to work here.
Sounds awful.
Yeah. At this financial company, one of the things I did was set up a developer virtual machine. And for a while, I maintained these virtual machines. And they were like, I don't know, 15 or 20 gigabytes, to download and copy around. And
That was a pattern for a while, right? Like that was
yeah,
a thing that a lot of places did.
yeah. And I thought, wow, this is so much better than it used to be. And then we had a new developer start and I had him get set up with it. And he's like, this still isn't that great. Like, it's using all my RAM and all this. And I'm like, yeah, we can do better. So
I did. I worked on one of those massive rollout projects where it was like we had a 16-page document and it was like you have to go through this or whatever. And I mean I know Simon and I actually worked on a project a couple of years ago where part of our work or our scope on it was documenting the deployment process. And it was in the financial sector as well, documenting that process so that we could automate the deployment, because you shouldn't be afraid to deploy. And yet there we were, just, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people who are using this live right now and it can't be offline. So
yeah.
And some of those, that's the thing, is that for some companies, downtime actually costs them money, because if they've got an average dollars per hour of sales that they're doing, and you take them offline for 14 hours and you multiply it by $8,000 an hour, we're talking like that's real dollars, right? Like that's somebody's salary.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then you do have these kind of, there are real cost advantages. Like it takes some work, but it makes the company real money. And now I never actually connected this, but the reason we did our deployments Friday afternoon through the weekend was because this company was open during stock trading hours. And so for them, those were hours where they weren't paying as much real money, right? So, but yeah.
Right on. So over the adventures there, in terms of working through that phase where Microsoft moved from a largely an internal to an external, kind of like where everybody sees you all the time. What was the culture shift like? What was that like to work through as you try to navigate between legal and internal teams that were resistant and external teams that had a hate on for Microsoft and thought that they should stay out? And like, what was it like working through all that stuff?
Like, it's good stuff. So, and people don't think about legal and how important it is. They think it's like, but legal's job is not to say no. Legal's job is to figure out how to say yes, right? And like, and there's a lot of things where it's like, if you want to ignore legal, you're actually shutting things off. Like, for instance, if you don't have thought through licenses for your source code, you're not telling people how they can legally use your source code, right? So it's much better to think ahead and say, we want people to use this source code, and here's how we're going to give them the legal cover to do that, So, and things like working through when we updated our open membership thing for .NET Foundation, that was working with lawyers and just saying like, okay, how can we do it? And the lawyers push back on a lot of stuff where I was like, hey, we can do this. And they're like, you're not making it clear enough here. And people are, like basically they wanted things to be as open as possible. So it was really good. I think one of the harder areas is building trust with community. There's some people that are always going to think Microsoft's evil and is doing some evil thing, and it gets harder and harder for me to try and understand that sometimes, when it's like, this is free, open source, it's under a permissive license. Like, what evil thing are we doing? Like, how bad are we at being evil masterminds when we're giving you free source code under a permissive license?
And the roadmap and the free support on GitHub and
So
I don't see Microsoft spelled with a $sign much anymore. I mean, there's still people I talk to that do it, but not as many as they used to be, for sure.
Yeah, and to be fair, Microsoft does find ways of doing something stupid that you could see as evil, but most of the time it's just, oh, we didn't think about that. Oops, So, yeah.
Less evil than the average company.
Right. As Hanselman says several times, it's like we'd have to be a lot more organized to be as evil as you think.
So this is the question that I bugged James about, but it's difficult, obviously, to look forward. But you've done years now in this .NET space. So looking forward 10 years, what sort of things are you excited about coming up? What sort of changes do you think are going to be shaping the industry for the next 10 years?
Interesting. Okay, I do feel like, and it's been delayed and delayed because one thing I am excited about is desktop .NET cross-platform desktop, and the goal originally was that was going to be one of the big things in .NET 5, and it ended up just this year with all honestly, there's difficult to manage all these developers that all worked in the same buildings, and now they're working from homes, and so that's gotten moved to most of it's going to happen like over the course of this next year in .NET 6. But there's so that's something I'm excited about. I feel like something I played with way back in the day. Like I mentioned that Linux Live CD, and we had Mono had support for Windows Forms, and it wasn't awesome, but it actually kind of worked, and it was so cool to be like, I'm writing .NET code on Linux, and button click and a label changes its text, and what. So I do think that's going to be a thing. I think with .NET we have some work to do on better connecting with cutting edge web technology. I feel like, like ASP.NET, MVC, and Razor Pages are great at rendering HTML on the server. There have been some work over the years on like integrating it with front end web stacks, and it's kind of always been like a little bit of a mismatch. I'm interested in Blazor. I don't subscribe to the whole Blazor, it's Blazor or this. I like the idea of like, hey, it's a tool, and it fits in. It's part of the things that fit in with your developer stack, and if it fits with the work you're doing, that's great. But I'm excited to see, partly because I just love the team that's building it. Like I really like, Dan Roth and Steve Sanderson and the rest of the team are just really sharp people and make some pretty wise decisions and are good at learning from what the community's done well. Then, well, you asked a question I could go on for a while, and I guess I have already. But one other thing I think is neat is we just had a .NET community stand up on Tuesday with David Fowler and Damian Edwards, and they're talking about some prototypes about really lightweight APIs using source generators. And so the idea is that you write, so you write similar to the same like method signatures you would write before for a controller, but using source generators, it generates all the code instead of having to go through all this middleware and pipeline and all this stuff. So it's lightweight code that you can swap in basically with the code you're already writing, except it's way faster and much more lightweight. So there's still a long, there's still so many more opportunities on things. Those are some areas that are kind of most obvious to me. Yeah.
Yeah, those are going to be really interesting. We were just chatting the other day about source generators and trying to decide what they were called, whether they were source generators or code generators.
Yeah,
seems to depend on which blog post you read.
That's fair. Yeah. Yeah. It's really fascinating to me. And the team has said that they were surprised. They basically were like, it'll take a while for people to care about these. They thought it was mostly going to be like an internal feature they'd use for some things. And already the community is like, I could use this JSON file, a configuration, and use it to generate out all this other source code for a front end thing, or like some really complex. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect parallel, but the stuff that you see in F# with type providers, that is super useful, and that's obviously runtime, and this is more compile time, but it's still a really compelling idea.
Absolutely, yeah.
Much cleaner than the old T4 stuff that I used to do back in the day.
Exactly what I was just thinking about.
Yeah, T4 like kind of worked, but it was always kind of a weird like, oh, you're using T4? Oh, all right, so nice to have something that's really kind of a much, so and also not having to do like reflection emit or any kind of crazy stuff there, right? I mean, it's kind of a nicer syntax. So
yeah, T4 did a good job, but it was not easy to use.
No. No. Yeah.
Cool.
All right, great. Well, we're going to probably draw this to a close, but thank you so much for joining us today, Jon. It's always interesting to see kind of how things are viewed from the other side of the looking glass and see what's happening inside Microsoft. So we're really excited for the next 10 years. And I'm pretty excited to see what's going to happen with Mac development in the next little bit. It seems like there's been some good moves there. So you're probably in an exciting space for the next little while. And for all of our viewers, thank you for joining us. Remember to like, comment, and share, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.
Cheers.
Bye.